In Wales, cultural identity is for the majority of people something that is expressed in ways that is not about language. In Wales, there's 3.5 million people, and at most 500,000 would talk about language as a key component of their identity. That must be stressed, and I think that's very different from the Spanish regions. It's therefore unsurprising, I guess, that the survival of a specifically Welsh cinema is dependent on a range of factors, not just on language. Key to this is the question that's troubled all scholars of national cinemas in the last 30 years, namely, what is a British film, or a Galician film, or a Welsh film? What does that mean? You know, this is an attempt. If a film is British, is it produced by a British national? Is it made with British talent or technicians? Is it made on British soil with British money, etc., etc.? It's a very common question. I guess many people in this room have talked about that in different contexts. Since Wales became an autonomous country or an autonomous nation, politicians have placed a great deal of store by this definition of Welsh identity. It's particularly true in Wales because their hard power is very limited. The soft questions about identity, politicians give it a lot of discussion, a lot of attention, maybe not always to artists' benefit. But this thinking by politicians has often been dominated less by any sense of what Welsh identity might look like, and more by the idea that the creative industries can deliver much needed economic regeneration to post-industrial Wales. People talk very foolishly, I think, of replacing coal mines, steelworks, shipbuilding with films and arts. It's a very ill thought through policy very often. That's a bit beyond the scope of this paper, but I'd just like to show you for a moment a little clip from that's made by the Wales Screen Commission. The Wales Screen Commission is mainly concerned with attracting filmmakers to come and film in Wales, but it also is concerned with the promoting of Welsh national identity. So those two things become quite confused, I think, and it has a consequence for Welsh cinema.
On the screen you'll see two quotes from one of the key producers in Norway at the moment, Erik Vogel. And effectively, he argues that when he's making films, I'm going to read out the quote, I see this phenomenon of these Nordic genre films emerging partly as generational and cultural, with a shared set of inspirations implanted in people who were born in the West sometime in the 1970s and had our childhood in the 1980s. This generation has since then come into positions of being able to make films. We share cultural touchstones like Lucas Spielberg, Amblin Entertainment, certain comic books, VHS culture, Cold War, and so on. So effectively, these sorts of film producers that are now emerging in the Nordic countries are people who were brought up at a similar time, who share a similar set of cultural values that they then effectively adopt into the types of films they produce within these small nation cinemas. But also interestingly, according to Vogel, there's a technological aspect to this as well. So many of these productions take advantage of advanced digital effects, cinematographic equipment, and so on, which are also still made within relatively low budgets. So to unpack some of this, I'll briefly discuss another intriguing example of a small nation film going global. The case here is a film called Norwegian Ninja. It's effectively a rewriting of history. A Norwegian politician from the 1980s who was accused of being a KGB agent is in this film reimagined as a ninja working for the Norwegian king. And you can imagine what follows from that. But the main point here is that these are not underground productions. They're not the types of fan productions that one could associate a poster like this with. They're actually quite large budget, quite important films in terms of the film cultural role they play in, for example, in Norway. So this film, according to Vogel, uses a whole range of imported cultural references, so Star Wars, ninja culture, and so on. But what is interesting, at least in terms of Vogel here, is that he considers these sorts of references more to do with the form of the film. So the ways that the film is made, the way that the narrative of the film operates. But the actual content and themes here are, at least according to him, Norwegian. So you need a certain level of competence in Norwegian history to understand most of the references of the film. Also, its language is, of course, Norwegian. But if you look at the film with the sound off, for example, you could easily mistake it for being from really anywhere in the world, actually. But these are also films that have gained the support of the Norwegian Film Institute.
There's a tension between two sectors in Galician cinema, which is the idea promoted by the institutions that we need commercial films, we need to be competitive in the global market, and the assistance of a bunch of filmmakers who are conscious that we are a small country with a small budgeting for films, and they do small films as well, all right? So this tension is interesting in terms of what production we consider Galician and what is seen from here to the world. I go now to the second keyword, visibility, that affects this all the same, the commercial films, but also the small films. I mean, if we don't have an audience, we don't have cinema. Margarita explained that before. I mean, we need to look for new audiences. There is a crisis of distribution of cinema. There's a crisis of cinema houses all around the world. And we need to look for new appeals, for new audiences. But we again need the intervention of the institutions for acquiring not only knowledge about how to deal with distribution, but the money for trying to get this funding and to move and do some marketing around the world of our films. In the case of Galician cinema, that Audiovisual Act of 1999 that I talked about before tried to link Galician cinema with European declarations for promotion and protecting cultural diversity, but neglected the visibility as part of the strategy and concentrated in the financing of production. All the same that in the countries mentioned before, the focus in financing is production. But I will talk here briefly. I will have a look at the subsidies this year, and if you put together all the budget for producing films, Galician cultural content or not, and you have a look at the specific budget for marketing, subtitling, and dubbing, you find that for 2014, this subsidy for promotion, commercialization, and exhibition of the Galician audiovisual products means less than a 5% of the global amount of money for producing cinema. In the last year, however, there were some valuable initiatives oriented mostly for interior audience. I mean, we need to go beyond our frontiers, but we need to appeal our natural audience too. And it's very difficult. Here we have a group of people that we have access to Galician cinema because we work in the academia, we study HC. But when you go abroad, just to the street, and you ask any in the street, do you know any Galician film? Or did you watch any Galician film this year? I don't know if they are going to talk about El Niño, or they will say that they don't know what Galician cinema is.